Hey there, storytelling fans. Before we dive into tonight's riveting tale of betrayal and reconciliation, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next in our journey through the human experience. Now, let's begin our story on a rainy night 12 years ago when one woman's life changed forever. The rain hammered against the windows like an unwelcome visitor, each drop a reminder of the storm that had just erupted inside Rebecca Miller's home. The sound of the front door slamming shut still reverberated through the empty hallway, mingling with the thunder outside in a cruel symphony of abandonment. Rebecca stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her fingers still clutching the crumpled note James had left on the coffee table. Her husband of 15 years, gone. The college fund they had painstakingly built for their daughter Emma, emptied. The trust she had placed in the man who had promised to stand by her through everything, shattered beyond repair. "Mommy!" a small voice called from the top of the stairs. "Where did Daddy go?" I heard shouting. Rebecca quickly wiped the tears from her face before turning to face her 8-year-old daughter. Emma stood in her pajamas, her favorite stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand, her eyes wide with innocent concern. "He had to go away for a while, sweetheart," Rebecca managed, her voice cracking slightly despite her best efforts. "Is it because of me?" Emma asked, her lower lip trembling. "Is it because I broke his watch yesterday?" Rebecca crossed the room in 3 swift strides and gathered her daughter into her arms. "No, baby. Never think that. This has nothing to do with you." She pulled back, looking into eyes that were so painfully similar to James's. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people. Bad choices. But that's on them, not on us." As she held her daughter, Rebecca's gaze drifted to the window, where the rain continued to fall mercilessly. Somewhere out there, James was with her. Vanessa, his executive assistant. The woman whose name had appeared too many times on his phone in recent months. The woman who, according to James's hastily scrawled note, made him feel alive again. That night, after tucking Emma back into bed with promises that everything would be okay, promises Rebecca wasn't sure she could keep, she sat alone in the kitchen. The house seemed to creak and moan under the weight of its sudden emptiness. She reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found James's name. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but pride stopped her from pressing it. Instead, she opened her laptop and logged into their joint bank account. The balance stared back at her, $212.47. Just yesterday, there had been over $45,000. Emma's college fund, their emergency savings, everything they had worked for. "How could you?" she whispered to the empty room, her hands beginning to shake with a rage that burned hotter than her tears. "How could you do this to your own daughter?" The first few days passed in a blur of shock and disbelief. Rebecca moved through her routine like a ghost, dropping Emma at school, going to her job as a high school English teacher, preparing meals that she barely touched. She called the bank, the police, even James's bewildered parents in Ohio, but the answer was always the same. Without evidence of coercion, a husband withdrawing money from a joint account wasn't a crime, just an act of breathtaking betrayal. At night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Rebecca would sit on the porch swing, watching the street as if expecting James's car to appear, bringing him back with apologies and explanations. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the vigil became less about hope and more about processing the anger that had settled in her chest like a stone. "You need to file for divorce," her sister Melissa told her over coffee 6 weeks after James had left. "You need to make this official, Becca. For yourself and for Emma." Rebecca nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the coffee shop door, scanning each male figure that entered with an automatic reflex she couldn't seem to control. "He's not coming back," Melissa said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "And honestly, would you even want him to, after what he did?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Would she? The James she had loved, the man who had held her hand through her father's funeral, who had cried when Emma was born, who had built the treehouse in their backyard, despite having no carpentry skills whatsoever, that man seemed worth waiting for. But that man was a fiction now, erased by the reality of emptied bank accounts and midnight escapes. "No," Rebecca finally said, the word feeling like both a surrender and a declaration of war. "No, I wouldn't." By the time the first anniversary of James's departure arrived, Rebecca had built a new life from the ruins of the old one. She had taken on extra classes at school to make ends meet. She had sold their house, too big and too full of memories, and moved with Emma into a cozy apartment closer to downtown. She had filed for divorce, which was granted in James's absence after multiple failed attempts to locate him. The wound had scarred over, though it still ached when Emma asked questions about her father that Rebecca couldn't or wouldn't answer. "Why doesn't Daddy ever call me?" Emma asked on her 9th birthday, after opening presents from her mother, aunt, and grandparents, but nothing from James. Rebecca had prepared for this question, rehearsed answers that were both honest and age-appropriate, but in the moment, all her carefully chosen words abandoned her. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said simply. "I wish I did. Does he not love me anymore?" Emma's voice was small, her eyes downcast as she fidgeted with the ribbon from one of her gifts. Rebecca pulled her daughter close, feeling a surge of protective fury toward James. "Your father made some mistakes, Emma, big ones, but I know he loved you very much. Sometimes people get lost in their own problems and don't know how to find their way back." It wasn't enough, no explanation could be, but it was all she had to offer. As years passed, Rebecca watched her daughter grow from a confused child into a resilient teenager. Emma developed her father's analytical mind, but, thankfully, none of his capacity for deception. She excelled in school, joined the debate team, made friends easily. If she carried wounds from her father's abandonment, she wore them privately, rarely mentioning James as she moved through her high school years. Rebecca, meanwhile, had found a quiet contentment in her reconfigured life. She had been promoted to head of the English department. She had dated occasionally, though nothing serious had developed. She had learned to sleep in the middle of the bed and to make decisions without second-guessing herself. She had learned to live without looking back. Until the morning the phone rang. It was a Tuesday in April, 12 years after that rainy night when everything had changed. Rebecca was preparing for work, mentally reviewing her lesson plan for her AP literature class while pouring coffee into her travel mug. Emma, now 20, was home from college on spring break, still asleep in her old bedroom. When the landline rang, a relic Rebecca kept mainly for emergencies, she answered without checking the caller ID, expecting a telemarketer or perhaps the school secretary. "Hello?" Silence greeted her, followed by the sound of someone breathing heavily, as if they had been running. Rebecca was about to hang up when a voice spoke, a voice that sent an electric current through her body, freezing her in place. "Rebecca." It wasn't a question, but a statement, laden with emotion she couldn't immediately identify. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor, dark liquid spreading across the tiles like a stain. She knew that voice. Despite 12 years of absence, despite all her efforts to forget, she knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. "James," she whispered, her free hand gripping the counter for support. "I need to talk to you. Now." His voice was urgent, tinged with something that sounded remarkably like fear, an emotion she had rarely associated with her confident, borderline arrogant ex-husband. "You've got to be kidding me," Rebecca said, finding her footing in anger. 12 years, James. 12 years without a word, without a single child support payment, without so much as a birthday card for your daughter, and now you call demanding to talk. "Please," he said, and the desperation in his voice gave her pause. "It's not what you think. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important." "Important to who?" "You, because you lost that right a long time ago." "Rebecca, listen to me. His voice dropped lower, almost to a whisper. "I'm in trouble. Serious trouble. And it's not just about me. It's about Emma." At the mention of her daughter's name, Rebecca's protective instincts flared. "Don't you dare bring her into whatever mess you've created. She's moved on. We both have." "Has she?" James asked, and something in his tone sent a chill down Rebecca's spine. Has she really moved on, or has she been looking for answers? Answers that might put her in danger? Rebecca glanced toward Emma's bedroom door, still closed. Her daughter had indeed been asking more questions lately about her father, his family, his past, his disappearance. Questions that had seemed innocent enough at the time. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca demanded, her voice dropping to match his hushed tone. "I can't explain over the phone. I need to see you, today." "That's not happening," Rebecca said, even as a nagging sense of unease began to build in her chest. "Rebecca, please. I wouldn't ask if—" His voice cut off suddenly, replaced by the sound of movement and muffled cursing. "I have to go. I'll be there by noon." "James, wait!" But the line had already gone dead, leaving Rebecca standing amid spilled coffee and broken ceramic, holding a silent phone and feeling as though the carefully constructed piece of the last 12 years had just been shattered as completely as her mug. She slowly placed the phone back in its cradle, her mind racing. Should she call the police, warn Emma, pack their bags and leave town until whatever storm James was bringing had passed? Before she could decide, Emma's bedroom door opened, and her daughter emerged, stretching and yawning. "Morning, Mom," she said sleepily, then paused, taking in the scene. The broken mug, the coffee spreading across the floor, and the undoubtedly stunned expression on Rebecca's face. "What happened? Are you okay?" Rebecca forced a smile. "Just clumsy this morning. Nothing to worry about." As she bent to clean up the mess, Rebecca felt the weight of James's words pressing down on her. It's about Emma. Whatever was happening, whatever danger James believed existed, she needed to understand it before involving their daughter. She would meet him not because she owed him anything, but because after 12 years of questions without answers, she deserved the truth. And if that truth somehow threatened Emma, Rebecca needed to know exactly what they were facing. What she didn't realize as she swept up the broken pieces of her mug was that by noon, the broken pieces of her past would come rushing back with consequences she couldn't possibly imagine. Rebecca spent the hours after James's call in a state of agitated anticipation. She called in sick to work, something she rarely did, and paced the apartment while Emma lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone and occasionally giving her mother curious glances. "Are you sure you're okay?" Emma asked around 11, looking up from her device. "You seem, I don't know, wired or something." Rebecca paused her pacing. "I'm fine, just a little headache." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She had spent years being honest with her daughter, building trust to compensate for James's betrayal, and now here she was, keeping secrets. "I'm going to run a few errands," Rebecca said, checking her watch. "Do you need anything while I'm out?" Emma shook her head, her attention already back on her phone. Rebecca studied her daughter for a moment, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her lanky frame sprawled across the couch, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her screen. She looked so much like James that sometimes it hurt to look at her, especially around the eyes, those same intense, analytical eyes that could see through pretense. What had James meant about Emma being in danger? What could their daughter possibly have done that would bring him back after all these years? At 11:45, Rebecca grabbed her purse and keys. "I shouldn't be long," she told Emma. "Maybe we can grab lunch when I get back." Emma nodded absently. "Sure, Mom." Outside, Rebecca sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel as she tried to steady her breathing. She had told James nothing about where they lived now, but somehow she knew he would find her. James had always been resourceful, manipulatively so. She didn't have to wait long. At exactly noon, a taxi pulled up to the curb across the street. Rebecca watched through her windshield as a man stepped out, paid the driver, and then stood on the sidewalk, scanning the apartment building. If she hadn't been looking for him, she might not have recognized James Miller. The tall, confident man with the perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and designer suits had been replaced by someone thinner, grayer, more hunched. He wore jeans and a plain button-down shirt that hung loosely on his frame. His once thick, dark hair was cropped short and streaked with silver. 12 years had aged him more than they should have, Rebecca thought, feeling an unwelcome pang of something. Not sympathy, certainly not after what he'd done, but perhaps recognition of shared mortality, of time's relentless march. Before he could approach the building, Rebecca got out of her car and crossed the street. James spotted her immediately, freezing in place as she approached. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, a canyon of unspoken words and unexplained actions stretching between them. "Rebecca," he finally said, her name coming out like a sigh of relief. "You look terrible," she replied, surprising herself with the observation. A ghost of his old smile flickered across his face. Always direct. "I've missed that." "Don't!" Rebecca said sharply. "Don't pretend this is some kind of romantic reunion. You said you needed to talk about Emma, so talk." James glanced around nervously, his eyes scanning the street. "Not here. Is there somewhere private we can go?" Rebecca crossed her arms. "The park down the block has benches. It's public enough that I feel safe meeting my thief of an ex-husband, but quiet enough that we won't be overheard." If the barb stung, James didn't show it. He merely nodded and gestured for her to lead the way. They walked in silence to the small neighborhood park, finding an isolated bench beneath an old oak tree. Rebecca sat with her purse on her lap, one hand inside it, fingers wrapped around the pepper spray she'd started carrying years ago. James sat at the other end of the bench, leaving as much space between them as possible. "You look good," he said after a moment. "Really good." "James," Rebecca warned, "I didn't come here for small talk." He nodded, running a hand over his short hair. "Right. Sorry." He took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive underwater. "What do you know about what Emma's been doing at college?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. "She's studying computer science. She's on the dean's list. She has friends, a boyfriend, I think, though she's been pretty private about that part of her life." She narrowed her eyes. "Why? Has she ever mentioned anything about research projects, special assignments, maybe something related to data mining or encryption?" Rebecca frowned. "She's mentioned working on some coding projects, but I don't know the details. I'm an English teacher, James. When Emma talks tech, I mostly just nod and smile." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What about her boyfriend? Do you know his name? What he studies?" "I told you she's private about that. I think his name is Marcus or Michael, something with an M." Rebecca's patience was wearing thin. "What is this about, James? You said Emma was in danger." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the ground between his feet. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low Rebecca had to lean in to hear him. "When I left," he began, then stopped, swallowing hard. "When I left, it wasn't just about Vanessa. That was part of it, yes, but there was more to it. More than stealing your daughter's college fund and running off with your mistress." Rebecca couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "Please, enlighten me." James winced. "I deserve that. I deserve worse, actually." He looked up at her, his eyes haunted. "The money, I didn't spend it all on myself. Most of it went to paying off a debt. A dangerous debt." Rebecca stared at him. "What kind of debt?" "The kind you get when you make deals with the wrong people." James rubbed his hands together nervously. "I was laundering money through the firm, Rebecca. Not huge amounts at first, just enough to cover some gambling debts. But it escalated. I got in too deep with some very powerful, very dangerous people." "You're saying you were involved with criminals?" Rebecca felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. All those late nights at the office. "Sometimes I was working. Sometimes I was moving money around, covering tracks. He looked away, shame evident in his posture. When they asked me to move a much larger sum, I got scared. I tried to back out, but they made it clear that wasn't an option. They threatened you and Emma. Rebecca felt cold, despite the warm spring air. So you ran? With our money? I thought if I disappeared with Vanessa, who by the way was never actually my mistress, just a convenient cover story, and gave them most of the money, they'd leave you and Emma alone. You'd hate me, but you'd be safe. He laughed humorlessly. It worked too. For 12 years it worked. Until now, Rebecca said, beginning to understand. What changed? James finally met her eyes directly. Emma changed it. 3 weeks ago, I got a warning from an old contact who still keeps tabs on the organization. Emma has apparently been doing some kind of advanced data mining project for her computer science program. Somehow she stumbled onto encrypted financial records that could expose not just what I did, but the entire operation. Records that trace back to people who will do anything to keep their activities hidden. Rebecca's hand tightened around the pepper spray in her purse. You're saying our daughter accidentally hacked into criminal financial records? Not accidentally, James said grimly. She's been specifically looking into financial irregularities at Meridian Capital, my old firm. She's been searching for information about me, Rebecca, about what happened, why I left. The realization hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Emma had indeed been asking more questions lately about her father, showing a renewed interest in understanding his disappearance. But Rebecca had assumed it was just part of growing up, of forming her own identity. How would she even know to look there? Rebecca asked. Because she's smart. Because she inherited my head for numbers and your determination. Pride briefly flickered across James's face before fear reasserted itself. The problem is, she has no idea what she's uncovered or who might be watching. These people monitor for exactly this kind of intrusion, and they don't ask questions before eliminating threats. Eliminating? Rebecca repeated, her mouth suddenly dry. James nodded solemnly. I've been on the run for 12 years, using different names, staying off the grid. When my contact warned me about Emma's activities, I knew I had to risk coming back. These people don't care that she's just a curious kid looking for her father. To them, she's a liability. Rebecca stood abruptly, needing to move, to process. This is insane. You show up after 12 years with some story about criminal organizations targeting our daughter. Do you know how this sounds? Like the desperate fabrication of a man who abandoned his family? James suggested quietly. I know. If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either. Then why should I? James reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, offering it to Rebecca. She hesitated before taking it, unfolding it to reveal what looked like a printout of an email. What am I looking at? She asked. The highlighted IP address is from Emma's laptop at her university. The timestamps show when she accessed certain encrypted files. The response code at the bottom is an automated security alert that went to the organization's tech team. James pointed to a line of text at the bottom of the page. That code there, it's their internal flag for identify and neutralize. Rebecca felt her legs weaken, and she sank back onto the bench. This could be fabricated. You could have made this up. I could have, James agreed, but why would I? What would I gain by coming back now, putting myself at risk if not to warn you? Rebecca studied his face, looking for signs of the deception she had missed years ago. But all she saw was fear, raw, genuine fear. If what you're saying is true, she said slowly, then what do we do? How do we protect her? James looked relieved that she was at least considering the possibility. First, we need to get Emma to stop digging. Then, we need to make it clear to these people that she doesn't have the information they think she does, that she's not a threat. And how exactly do we do that? I have a plan, James said. But it's complicated, and it involves all of us, including Emma. Rebecca shook her head. I don't want her involved in this. She doesn't need to know about your criminal past. Rebecca, James said gently, she's already involved. She's been looking for me for answers. Don't you think she deserves the truth, even if that truth is ugly?" Before Rebecca could respond, her phone chimed with a text message. She pulled it from her pocket, still trying to process everything James had told her. The message was from Emma. "Where are you? Someone just came to the apartment looking for you. Said he was an old colleague. Seemed weird, so I didn't let him in." "Everything okay?" Rebecca showed the text to James, whose face drained of color. "They found her already," he whispered. "We need to go, now." As they hurried back toward the apartment building, Rebecca's mind raced with questions and fears. Was James telling the truth? Was Emma really in danger? And if so, how could they possibly protect her from people powerful enough to force James into hiding for 12 years? The answers, she suspected, would be far more complicated and far more dangerous than anything she was prepared for. But one thing was clear. The past she had tried so hard to leave behind had finally caught up with them all. The walk back to the apartment was tense, with James repeatedly checking over his shoulder and Rebecca texting Emma to stay inside with the doors locked. As they rounded the corner onto Rebecca's street, James suddenly grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a parked van. "That black sedan," he whispered, pointing toward a car idling across from her building. "I recognize the type. It's them." Rebecca peered around the van. The car had tinted windows and no distinguishing features, but something about its purposeful stillness sent a chill through her. "How can you be sure?" she asked. 12 years of looking over my shoulder," James replied grimly. "You develop an instinct for these things." Rebecca's phone buzzed with another text from Emma. "Mom, they're still out there. 2 men in suits. They've been sitting in a car for 20 minutes. Should I call the police?" "No police," James said when Rebecca showed him the message. "If these are the people I think they are, they have connections in law enforcement. It would only complicate things." "Then what do we do?" Rebecca demanded. "I'm not leaving my daughter alone in there." James was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need a distraction. Something to draw them away long enough for us to get Emma out safely." He looked at Rebecca. "Do you trust me?" The question hung between them, loaded with history and pain. Did she trust the man who had abandoned her and their daughter? Who had stolen their savings and disappeared without explanation? Who was now telling a story about criminal organizations and data breaches that sounded like something from a thriller novel? "No," Rebecca said honestly. "I don't trust you, James. But right now, you're all I've got." He nodded, accepting her answer. "Fair enough. I need your car keys." Rebecca hesitated only briefly before handing them over. "What are you going to do?" "Create a diversion. When they follow me, you go get Emma. Take her to..." He thought for a moment. "Take her to the Westfield Mall. It's public, crowded. Wait for me in the food court. If I'm not there within 2 hours, leave. Go somewhere they won't look for you." "And where would that be? These people apparently found us easily enough." "Your sister's place in Rutherford," James said. "They might know about it, but it's not the first place they'll look." Rebecca stared at him. "How do you know my sister moved to Rutherford?" A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or embarrassment, crossed James's face. "I've kept tabs on you both, from a distance, just to make sure you were safe." The revelation that James had been watching them, perhaps for years, should have angered Rebecca. Instead, she felt an unsettling mixture of confusion and, strangely, relief. At least he hadn't completely forgotten them. "Okay," she said, pushing those complicated feelings aside. "What's the plan?" 5 minutes later, Rebecca was crouched behind a hedge near her building's entrance, watching as her Toyota pulled out of its parking spot down the street. James drove past the black sedan slowly, deliberately, making himself visible. The reaction was immediate. The sedan's engine roared to life, and it pulled away from the curb, following Rebecca's car as it turned the corner. The moment they were out of sight, Rebecca ran for the building, heart pounding. She found Emma waiting just inside the door, a baseball bat in her hands. "Mom!" Emma dropped the bat and threw her arms around Rebecca. "What's going on? Who were those men?" "I'll explain everything, but right now we need to leave," Rebecca said. already guiding her daughter toward the back exit. "Is there anything you absolutely need from the apartment?" Emma looked confused, but shook her head. "Just my phone and wallet, which I have. Mom, you're scaring me." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry." Rebecca pushed open the rear door, checking that the alley behind the building was clear. "I promise I'll tell you everything once we're somewhere safe." They hurried through the alley to the next street over, where Rebecca hailed a taxi. As they settled into the back seat, she gave the driver directions to the mall, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Emma waited until they were moving before turning to her mother, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Those men were looking for you specifically. They knew your name." Rebecca nodded, trying to decide how much to share. James had said Emma deserved the truth, but how do you tell your daughter that her long-absent father was involved with criminals, that her innocent research had put her in danger? "Mom," Emma said firmly, "I'm not a kid anymore. Whatever's happening, I need to know." Rebecca took a deep breath. "It's about your father." Emma's eyes widened. "Dad, what about him?" "He's back," Rebecca said, watching her daughter's face carefully. "He contacted me this morning. That's where I was, meeting with him." Emma's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, anger, and finally settled on cautious curiosity. "Why now, after all this time?" "He says—" Rebecca hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "He says you might be in danger because of some research you've been doing at school, something about data mining and financial records." Emma paled visibly. How could he possibly know about that? "So it's true? You've been researching financial records?" Emma looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I've been trying to find him, Mom, for years. I started with basic searches, but there was nothing, no social media, no public records after he left. It was like he vanished." "So you decided to dig deeper," Rebecca said, understanding dawning. "Into his old company's records." Emma nodded. "I have this professor, Dr. Chen, who specializes in digital forensics. I've been working with him on an independent study project using some advanced tools to analyze financial data. I told him I was interested in identifying patterns of fraud, but really—" She trailed off, looking guilty. "You were looking for traces of your father," Rebecca finished for her. "I thought maybe I'd find something that would explain why he left," Emma said quietly. "Some reason that would make sense of it all." Rebecca felt a pang of sympathy for her daughter. Despite Emma's outward acceptance of James's absence, she had clearly been carrying questions all these years, questions Rebecca hadn't been able to answer. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Emma hesitated. "Maybe. I'm not sure. There were some anomalies in the transaction records from around the time Dad disappeared. Large sums moving between accounts in ways that didn't make sense. And there were encrypted files that seemed to be related, but I couldn't access them fully." She looked at her mother with sudden alarm. "Mom, are you saying Dad thinks someone is after me because of this?" Before Rebecca could respond, the taxi pulled up to the mall entrance. She paid the driver and led Emma inside, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of the men from the black sedan. The food court was busy with afternoon shoppers, providing the anonymity of crowds that James had suggested. Rebecca found a table in the corner with a good view of all entrances and sat down with Emma. "Your father believes," she said once they were settled, "that the company he worked for was involved in some illegal activities, money laundering specifically, and he was part of it." Emma's jaw dropped. "Dad was a criminal?" "According to him, yes. He claims he got involved to cover gambling debts, then couldn't get out. When he left us, it was supposedly to protect us from the people he was working for." Rebecca wasn't sure she fully believed this explanation herself, but it was what James had told her. "So he didn't leave because he didn't love us anymore?" Emma's voice was small, vulnerable, in a way Rebecca hadn't heard since she was much younger. Rebecca reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "I don't know, Emma. I don't know if we can trust what he's saying, but he seems genuinely concerned for your safety. Where is he now? Creating a diversion. He took my car to lead those men away from us. He said he'd meet us here within 2 hours. Emma processed this information silently, her analytical mind visibly working through the implications. Finally, she asked, "Do you believe him about the danger?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I believe something has him scared. Whether it's exactly what he says, I'm not sure. But those men at our apartment were definitely looking for us, and they weren't there for a friendly chat. What do they want from me? According to your father, they think you've uncovered evidence of their operation through your research. They want to eliminate the threat." Emma's eyes widened as the full meaning of Rebecca's words sank in. "They want to kill me? Over some college research project? Your father says these are dangerous people who don't ask questions first." Rebecca squeezed Emma's hand. "Which is why we need to convince them you don't have anything that could harm them." "But I don't," Emma protested. "I mean, yes, I found some weird patterns, but nothing concrete. Nothing that could identify anyone or prove any crimes." "They don't know that," Rebecca pointed out. "And people like this don't take chances." Emma fell silent again, her face troubled. After a moment, she said, "I have some of the data backed up on a secure cloud server Dr. Chen set up for the project." Rebecca felt a chill. "Can it be accessed remotely?" "Not easily. It's protected by multiple layers of encryption. You need both a password and a physical authentication key that I keep on my keychain." Emma pulled out her keys, showing a small USB device attached to the ring. "Even with this, you'd need to know the password." We should assume they have resources to break that security," Rebecca said, thinking of the sophisticated operation James had described. "Is there any way to delete the data remotely?" Emma nodded slowly. "I could access the server from my phone and wipe it. But Mom, that's months of work, and it might not even be what they're worried about. I'm not sure exactly what I found." Rebecca understood her daughter's reluctance. Emma had always been meticulous about her schoolwork, taking pride in her achievements. Asking her to destroy her research was asking a lot. "I know it's a big sacrifice," Rebecca said gently, "but if there's even a chance it could keep you safe." Emma bit her lip, then nodded. "Okay, I'll delete it." She pulled out her phone and began tapping at the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. As Emma worked, Rebecca kept vigilant watch over the food court, noting every man in a suit, every person who seemed to linger too long or look in their direction. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. An hour passed. Then 90 minutes. No sign of James. "It's done," Emma finally said, putting down her phone. "Everything's wiped. Dr. Chen is going to kill me, but..." She shrugged, attempting nonchalance despite the worry evident in her eyes. "You did the right thing," Rebecca assured her. "Your safety is more important than any research project." Emma nodded, then glanced at her watch. "It's been almost 2 hours. Shouldn't Dad be here by now?" Rebecca checked her own watch, feeling anxiety build in her chest. "Yes, he should." She scanned the food court again, searching for any sign of James. "Give him a few more minutes." "What if something happened to him?" Emma asked, voicing the fear that Rebecca had been trying to suppress. "What if those men caught up to him?" "Your father is resourceful," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. "He's been evading these people for 12 years. He knows what he's doing." But as the 2-hour mark came and went, Rebecca's confidence began to waver. James had been clear. If he didn't arrive within 2 hours, they should leave. Go to Melissa's house in Rutherford. Assume the worst. "We need to go," she finally said, standing up. "Your father said if he didn't make it in 2 hours, we should head to your Aunt Melissa's." "But we can't just leave him," Emma protested, even as she gathered her things. "What if he's hurt? What if he needs help?" Rebecca felt torn between her daughter's concern and James's warning. "Emma, he was very specific about the timing. If he's not here, it means either he can't make it or..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Or he doesn't want to lead those men to us," Emma completed the thought. "I get it, She trailed off, looking around the food court one last time, as if hoping her father would materialize among the shoppers. Rebecca understood the complicated emotions playing across her daughter's face. Despite 12 years of absence, despite the hurt and abandonment, James was still Emma's father. The possibility of losing him again, permanently this time, was reopening wounds that had never fully healed. "Come on," Rebecca said gently, putting an arm around Emma's shoulders. "We'll call a rideshare to take us to Melissa's. Your father knows where to find us if he can." They were halfway to the mall exit when Rebecca spotted him. Not James, but a tall man in a dark suit standing near the entrance, scanning the crowd with practiced efficiency. He wasn't one of the men from outside their apartment, but something about his posture, his alertness, triggered Rebecca's newly awakened instincts. "Turn around," she whispered to Emma, steering her daughter back toward the food court. "Don't look back, there's someone watching the exit." They retreated to a clothing store with multiple entrances, moving quickly through the racks to reach the back exit that led to another wing of the mall. Rebecca kept Emma close, trying to appear like normal shoppers while constantly checking for pursuers. "How did they find us?" Emma asked quietly as they emerged into a less crowded area of the mall. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "Maybe they followed us from the apartment after all, or maybe—" A troubling thought occurred to her. "Your phone. Could they track your phone?" Emma's eyes widened. "If they have sophisticated enough tech, maybe. Especially if they knew which cloud server I was accessing." She pulled out her phone, looking at it with new suspicion. "I should turn it off. Maybe even get rid of it." "Not yet," Rebecca said. "We might need it to contact your father." She spotted a service exit at the end of the corridor. "There, that probably leads to the loading docks. We can find another way out." They were halfway to the exit when Rebecca's phone rang. She nearly jumped at the sound, quickly fishing it from her pocket. The screen showed an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Rebecca, it's me." James's voice was tight with tension. "Where are you?" "Still at the mall. We were about to leave. There are men here looking for us." "I know. They're everywhere. Listen carefully. Don't go to Melissa's. They know about her. They're watching her place." Rebecca felt a fresh wave of fear. How do they know so much about us? "They've been monitoring me for years, waiting for me to make contact with you. They probably have a file on everyone connected to us." James paused, and Rebecca could hear traffic sounds in the background. "I managed to lose the ones following me, but I had to ditch your car. I'm sorry. Forget the car. Where should we go if not to Melissa's?" "There's a motel off Highway 16, the Pine Ridge Inn. It's about 30 miles west of the city. Meet me there, room 114. "James, I don't like this. Emma and I should go to the police." "Rebecca, please." The desperation in his voice was palpable. "Trust me just this once. The police can't help with these people. They're too well connected." Rebecca looked at Emma, who was watching her intently, trying to follow the conversation. "Fine. Pine Ridge Inn, room 114. But James, if this is some kind of trick—" "It's not," he said firmly. "I'm trying to protect our daughter. That's all I've ever wanted to do." The line went dead before Rebecca could respond. She stared at the phone for a moment, then turned to Emma. "That was your father. Change of plans. We're not going to Melissa's." "I heard," Emma said. "This motel, do you think it's safe?" Rebecca wished she could offer reassurance, but the truth was she had no idea. "Your father seems to think so, and right now we don't have many options." They managed to slip out through the loading docks, finding themselves in a vast parking area behind the mall. Rebecca hailed another taxi, giving the driver an address several blocks from the Pine Ridge Inn, a precaution that felt almost ridiculous in its spy movie quality, yet necessary given the day's events. As they rode in silence, Rebecca studied her daughter's profile. Emma sat straight-backed and composed, but Rebecca could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her phone. At 20, Emma was no longer a child. Yet she was still so young to be facing this kind of danger created by her father's past actions. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said softly. You shouldn't have to deal with any of this. Emma turned to her, a sad smile tugging at her lips. Neither should you, Mom. But here we are. Here we are, Rebecca agreed, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. The taxi dropped them off near a strip mall, and they walked the remaining distance to the Pine Ridge Inn, a dated two-story motel that had seen better days. The neon sign flickered intermittently, several letters dark, giving the place an abandoned feel despite the few cars parked in the lot. Room 114 was on the ground floor, near the back of the property. Rebecca approached cautiously, Emma close behind her. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "What if it's a trap?" she whispered to Emma. "What if your father was forced to send us here?" Emma considered this, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister. "Pepper spray," she explained when Rebecca looked surprised. "You always taught me to be prepared." Despite everything, Rebecca felt a surge of pride in her daughter's resourcefulness. "Stand to the side of the door," she instructed, positioning herself similarly on the opposite side. She knocked 3 times, then stepped back quickly. The door opened almost immediately, revealing James. He looked even more haggard than he had earlier, with a fresh bruise forming on his cheekbone and a tear in his shirt sleeve. "Thank God," he breathed, relief evident in his voice. "Come in, quickly." Rebecca exchanged a glance with Emma, who nodded slightly, her hand still gripping the pepper spray in her pocket. They entered the room, James closing and double-locking the door behind them. The motel room was basic, 2 queen beds with faded floral spreads, a small table with 2 chairs, a TV that predated flat screens. James had drawn the heavy curtains, leaving only a small bedside lamp to illuminate the space. "Are you hurt?" Emma asked, breaking the awkward silence as she stared at her father, the first time she had seen him in 12 years. James touched his bruised cheek self-consciously. "It's nothing. Had a close call getting away from our friends." He hesitated, clearly uncertain how to interact with the daughter he had abandoned. "You've grown up," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "You look so much like your mother." Emma's expression remained neutral, betraying neither anger nor joy at seeing her father. "Everyone says I look like you, actually. The eyes, maybe," James conceded with a small, sad smile. "But you have your mother's strength, that's clear." Rebecca cut through the reunion. "James, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Emma deleted her research, but those men are still after us. What do they want?" James gestured for them to sit. Emma chose one of the beds, while Rebecca took a chair, positioning herself between her daughter and James. "It's not just about the research anymore," James said, pacing the small room. "When I contacted you, I triggered their surveillance. They've been watching for years, waiting for me to make that mistake. Now they think I'm back to expose them, that I've been gathering evidence all this time." "Have you?" Rebecca asked. James stopped pacing and met her gaze. "Yes. Not intentionally at first. It was just insurance, protection in case they found me. But over time, I collected enough to bring down their entire operation." "Then why haven't you gone to the authorities?" Emma asked, speaking directly to her father for the first time. "Why live in hiding for 12 years if you had a way out?" "Because the evidence implicates me too," James admitted. "I'd be trading one prison for another. And more importantly, using it would put a target on both of your backs forever. These people have long memories and longer reach than you can imagine." Rebecca processed this information. "So, what's changed now? Why risk contacting us if you knew it would trigger their surveillance?" "Because of Emma's research," James explained, turning to his daughter. "You got too close, stumbled onto things that connected to their current operations. They don't know exactly what you found or who you might have shared it with. As long as that uncertainty exists, they'll keep coming." "But I told you, I deleted everything," Emma said. "And honestly, I didn't understand most of what I found. It was just data patterns that seemed unusual." "They don't know that," James said, echoing Rebecca's earlier words. "And they won't take your word for it. They need to be convinced you're not a threat." "How do we do that?" Rebecca asked. James sat on the edge of the second bed, facing them both. "I have a plan. It's risky, but it could work. We give them what they think Emma found, a carefully edited version that appears damaging but actually leads nowhere. We make them think they've contained the threat. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Rebecca objected. We'd have to make contact with them directly. Not all of you, James said quietly. Just me. I'll be the one making contact. Emma sat forward. That's suicide. They'll kill you. Maybe, James acknowledged, but they'll have what they want, and they'll have no reason to come after either of you again. It's the cleanest solution. No, Rebecca said firmly. There has to be another way. What about your evidence? Could we use it as leverage? James shook his head. Using it would only escalate the situation. These people don't respond well to threats. Then we go to the FBI, Emma suggested. Witness protection exists for exactly this kind of situation. The FBI might be an option, James conceded, but we'd need to be careful about how we approach them. These people have informants throughout law enforcement. If we make the wrong move, it could backfire catastrophically. The conversation continued in circles as they debated options, none of which seemed without significant risk. Outside, dusk fell, casting the motel room in deeper shadows. James ordered pizza delivery, careful to give a false name and pay in cash. They ate in uneasy silence, the reality of their situation weighing heavily on all of them. As night settled in, practical matters arose. The room had 2 beds but 3 people. James immediately volunteered to take the floor. I've slept in worse places, he said when Rebecca started to object out of politeness rather than concern for his comfort. They established an awkward routine, Emma taking one bed, Rebecca the other, James making a makeshift pallet on the floor with extra blankets from the closet. The domestic normality of preparing for sleep seemed almost absurd given the circumstances, yet it provided a needed distraction from the danger surrounding them. As Rebecca lay in the darkened room, listening to Emma's steady breathing from the next bed and James's occasional shifting on the floor, her mind raced with questions and fears. How had they arrived at this point? How had her orderly, rebuilt life been so thoroughly disrupted in the span of a single day? And most troublingly, what would tomorrow bring? Rebecca woke to sunlight filtering through a gap in the motel curtains. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. James's return, the men in the black sedan, their hurried escape to this dingy motel room. She sat up quickly, scanning the room. Emma was still asleep in the other bed, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since this ordeal began. But James's makeshift bed on the floor was empty, the blankets neatly folded. Panic seized Rebecca. Had he abandoned them again? Left them to face the danger alone while he disappeared back into whatever shadow life he'd been living? Her fear was interrupted by the sound of a key in the lock. The door opened slowly, and James entered, balancing a tray of coffee cups and a paper bag that smelled of pastries. He froze when he saw Rebecca awake and staring at him. "I didn't want to wake you," he said quietly, setting the breakfast items on the small table. "There's a coffee shop across the street. I thought we could all use the caffeine." Rebecca felt oddly embarrassed by her immediate assumption that he had fled. "Thanks," she said, getting up and accepting the cup he offered her. "And how long have you been up?" "A few hours," James admitted. "I don't sleep much these days." He glanced at Emma, still sleeping. She always was a heavy sleeper, even as a baby. The observation, this small parental memory, struck Rebecca unexpectedly. James had missed so much of Emma's life, yet he remembered details from her infancy with apparent clarity. "She still is," Rebecca confirmed, taking a sip of her coffee. "Sleeps through thunderstorms, fire alarms, everything." A comfortable silence fell between them, the first such moment since James's return. For a brief instant, Rebecca could almost imagine they were a normal family on a road trip, stopping at a motel, sharing breakfast while their daughter slept in. The fantasy shattered when Emma stirred, sitting up and looking confused before her eyes focused on her father. The wariness returned to her expression immediately. Good morning, James said, holding up the remaining coffee cup. I got breakfast. Dundays. Emma accepted the coffee with a murmured thanks, but didn't touch the pastries James offered. She disappeared into the bathroom, emerging minutes later with her hair pulled back and her face washed, looking more composed. We need to make a plan, she announced, sitting at the edge of her bed. We can't stay in this motel forever. Emma's right, Rebecca agreed. The longer we hide, the more time they have to find us. James nodded, looking impressed by their pragmatism. I've been thinking about our options. I still believe my original plan is the safest for both of you. The one where you sacrifice yourself. Emma interrupted. That's not an option. James looked surprised at her vehemence. I thought you'd be the last person concerned about what happens to me. Emma met his gaze directly. Just because I'm angry at you doesn't mean I want you dead. She hesitated, then added more softly, You're still my father. James looked momentarily overcome, turning away to compose himself. When he faced them again, his expression was resolved. Okay, no self-sacrifice. But we still need to convince these people that whatever Emma found isn't a threat to them. What about an anonymous tip to the FBI? Rebecca suggested. If the authorities started investigating the organization, wouldn't they be too busy defending themselves to worry about us? It could work, James said thoughtfully, but it would need to be carefully managed. We'd have to provide enough information to trigger an investigation without revealing our involvement. I could help with that, Emma offered. I know how to route communications through multiple servers, make them untraceable. James smiled slightly. Like father, like daughter, he murmured, then grew serious again. But there's still the question of what information to provide. It would need to be substantive enough to get attention, but not so specific that they could trace it back to us. What about your evidence? Rebecca asked. You said you've been collecting it for years. Couldn't we use part of that? James considered this. Maybe. I have it stored securely, not physically but digitally, broken into encrypted fragments across multiple locations. It would take time to retrieve it all, but I could access portions of it. Emma leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. That's actually brilliant. Distributed storage with fragmented encryption. That's advanced security protocol. I had good teachers, James said with a hint of pride. When you're hiding from people like this, you learn quickly or you don't survive. They spent the next hour formulating a plan. James would retrieve portions of his evidence, financial records that would trigger FBI interest without immediately implicating the highest levels of the organization. Emma would help anonymize the transmission to the authorities. Meanwhile, Rebecca would monitor news and police channels for any indication their actions had the desired effect. It could take days to see results, James warned. Maybe longer. In the meantime, we need to stay off the grid. That means new phones, cash only, no credit cards or IDs that can be traced. I have about $300 in cash, Rebecca said, plus whatever's in my checking account, but using an ATM would create an electronic trail. I have emergency funds, James assured her, enough to keep us going for a while. He checked his watch. We should move soon. We've been in one place too long already. As they gathered their few belongings, Rebecca felt a strange sense of unreality. Just 2 days ago, her life had been normal, predictable, stable, if somewhat lonely. Now she was on the run with her long-lost ex-husband, hiding from dangerous criminals, planning to anonymously contact the FBI. It felt like something from a movie, not something that happened to high school English teachers from the suburbs. They checked out of the motel separately, James first, then Rebecca and Emma 10 minutes later, and met at a bus stop 2 blocks away. James had already purchased tickets for the 3 of them on a regional bus heading west, away from the city. Where are we going? Emma asked as they boarded. A small town called Lakeside, James answered. About 70 miles from here. I stayed there for a few months years ago. It's quiet, out of the way. There's a rental cabin by the lake that takes cash and doesn't ask questions. The bus was nearly empty, allowing them to take seats far from the few other passengers. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Rebecca watched the city recede through the window, wondering when, or if, they would return to their normal lives. Beside her, Emma sat with her new prepaid phone, purchased by James at a convenience store, researching secure communication methods for their planned FBI tip. James sat across the aisle, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "How long have you lived like this?" Rebecca asked him quietly when Emma was absorbed in her task. "Always looking over your shoulder, never staying in one place too long." James's expression softened slightly. Too long. The first few years were the hardest. Constantly moving, using different names, working odd jobs for cash. Eventually, I developed a system, found ways to establish temporary identities that would hold up to basic scrutiny. "And Vanessa?" Rebecca couldn't help asking. "Was she really just a cover story?" James nodded. "She was an associate at the firm who had discovered some of the irregular transactions. They were planning to eliminate her. I convinced her to disappear with me, told her it was the only way to stay alive. We traveled together for about 6 months before parting ways. Last I heard, she was living under a new name in Canada. So there was never..." Rebecca left the question unfinished. "No," James said firmly. "There was never anything between us. I know that doesn't excuse what I did to you and Emma, but at least that part wasn't true." Rebecca absorbed this information silently. It was a small comfort to know James hadn't left them for another woman. But it didn't erase the years of abandonment, the financial hardship, the emotional damage to Emma. "Why didn't you try to contact us?" she finally asked. "A letter, a phone call, something to explain why you left?" James stared out the window, his reflection in the glass showing a pained expression. "I thought about it every day, drafted countless letters, picked up the phone 100 times. But I knew if I made contact they might trace it back to you. The only way to keep you both safe was to sever all ties completely. So instead you left us thinking you simply didn't want us anymore," Rebecca said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Do you have any idea what that did to Emma? To have her father walk out without even saying goodbye?" James turned to face her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I thought it was better for her to hate me than to be in danger because of me. I thought..." He paused, swallowing hard. "I thought I was making the right choice. The only choice. Now seeing what it did to both of you, I'm not so sure." Emma looked up from her phone, sensing the intensity of their conversation. "Everything okay?" Rebecca forced a smile. "Just catching up on ancient history." Emma studied them both for a moment, then returned to her work, though Rebecca suspected she was still listening. The bus journey continued in relative silence after that, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The urban landscape gradually gave way to suburbs, then to scattered rural communities, and finally to the forested countryside surrounding Lakeside. When they disembarked at the small town's single bus stop, Rebecca was struck by the picturesque quality of the place. A main street, lined with quaint shops, led down to the lake that gave the town its name, its surface glittering in the afternoon sun. Under different circumstances, it might have been a pleasant vacation spot. James led them to a diner at the edge of town, where they ordered late lunch and discussed next steps while waiting for their food. "The cabin is about a mile from here, accessible only by a private road," James explained, drawing a rough map on a napkin. "It's isolated enough for privacy, but close enough to town for supplies. The owner is an older man named Earl who minds his own business. I helped him rebuild his dock a few years back, so he remembers me." "Won't he think it's strange that you're suddenly showing up with a family?" Rebecca asked. "I'll tell him you're my sister and niece," James said, "visiting from out of state. He's not the type to ask many questions." Their food arrived, hamburgers and fries that reminded Rebecca she hadn't eaten properly since yesterday's pizza. As they ate, she noticed Emma watching her father when she thought he wasn't looking, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "What name did you use when you stayed here before?" Emma asked suddenly. James looked up from his meal. David? David Wilson? And who was David Wilson supposed to be? What was his story? James seemed taken aback by the questioning, but answered nonetheless. He was a widower from Colorado, former construction worker with a back injury that prevented him from working regularly. Kept to himself, did odd jobs around town for cash. How many identities have you had since you left? Emma pressed. 6 main ones, James admitted, plus temporary aliases when necessary. Emma nodded, absorbing this information with the same analytical focus she applied to her computer science projects. And which one is real? Which one is actually you? The question hung in the air, surprisingly profound for what had begun as simple curiosity. James set down his fork, considering his response carefully. I don't know anymore, he finally said, his voice quiet but steady. When you live as other people for so long, the lines blur. Parts of each identity become incorporated into who you are. Other parts of yourself get left behind. So the father I remember, Emma said, the one who taught me to ride a bike and read me stories at night. He doesn't exist anymore. James met his daughter's gaze directly. He's still here, buried under years of running and hiding, but still here. I'd never stop being your father, Emma, even when I couldn't be with you. Rebecca watched the exchange with a tightness in her throat. For all the pain James had caused, she could see the genuine anguish in his eyes as he spoke to their daughter. The lost years he could never reclaim, the relationship fractured, perhaps beyond repair. After lunch, they purchased essential supplies from the town's small grocery store, then followed the narrow road leading to the lakeside cabins. Earl, the owner, was exactly as James had described. An elderly man with weathered features who greeted David with a firm handshake and minimal questions about his companions. The cabin itself was rustic but clean, with 2 small bedrooms, a combined kitchen and living area, and a porch overlooking the lake. It was clearly designed for vacationers seeking simplicity rather than luxury, but it would serve their purpose. As evening approached, they settled into an uneasy domesticity. James built a fire in the small stone fireplace, while Rebecca prepared a simple dinner from their supplies. Emma sat at the kitchen table, continuing her work on securing their communication channels for the FBI tip. I think I've got it, she announced as they finished eating. A secure method to transmit the information without it being traceable back to us. Dad, I'll need access to your evidence files to complete the package. James nodded, wiping his hands on a napkin before retrieving his own prepaid phone. I can start the retrieval process tonight, but it will take time. The files are heavily fragmented and encrypted. Each piece requires separate authentication. How long? Rebecca asked. 24 hours minimum, James estimated, maybe longer depending on server response times. So we're stuck here for at least another day, Emma concluded. Is that so terrible? James asked, attempting levity. It's peaceful here. Might be nice to catch our breath before the next phase. Rebecca had to admit he had a point. After the frantic pace of the past 2 days, the idea of a quiet evening in this lakeside cabin held a certain appeal, even with the unusual company. As night fell, they found themselves in the living area, the fireplace casting warm light across the rustic furnishings. Despite the circumstances, there was something almost cozy about the scene. A family gathered around a fire, albeit a family fractured by years of separation and secrets. Tell me about college, James said to Emma after a period of comfortable silence. Your mother mentioned you're studying computer science? Emma nodded, setting aside her phone. Computer science with a minor in data analytics. I'm in my junior year at MTU. Michigan Tech, James said, nodding appreciatively. Excellent program. You always did have an aptitude for logic puzzles, even as a kid. You remember that? Emma seemed surprised. Of course. You could solve those wooden brain teasers faster than I could. Always 3 steps ahead. A fond smile crossed James's face. I used to think you'd be a mathematician or maybe an engineer. I considered both, Emma admitted. But there's something about coding that just clicks for me. Building something from nothing, solving problems through pure logic, it's satisfying. As they continued talking, Rebecca observed the gradual softening in Emma's demeanor. The wariness was still there, but curiosity was winning out. The natural desire to know this man, who was half of her genetic makeup, whose absence had shaped so much of her life. For his part, James seemed to drink in every detail Emma shared, asking thoughtful questions about her studies, her friends, her interests. There was a hunger in his attention, as though he was trying to consume 12 years of missed moments in a single conversation. Rebecca felt a complex emotion watching them. Not quite jealousy, but perhaps a twinge of possessiveness. She had been the one constant in Emma's life, the parent who had remained, who had made sacrifices and hard choices to give their daughter stability. Yet here was James, sliding back into fatherhood as though he had some right to it after all this time. "What about you, Mom?" Emma asked, pulling Rebecca from her thoughts. "Dad knows all about my life now. He should know about yours too." Rebecca hesitated, unsure what aspects of her post-James life to share. "Not much to tell, really. I'm still teaching at Westridge High, department head now. I garden. I joined a book club a few years ago." "She's being modest," Emma told James. "Mom published a collection of short stories 3 years ago. Won a regional literary award for it." James looked genuinely impressed. "You always talked about writing more seriously. I'm glad you pursued it." "It was therapeutic," Rebecca said simply. "A way to process everything." An awkward silence fell at this oblique reference to James's abandonment. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, staring into the fire. "I read them, you know," he finally said. "Your stories, under the pen name R.J. Winters." Rebecca stared at him in shock. "How did you—" "Like I said, I kept tabs on you both. From a distance." James looked almost embarrassed by the admission. "The third story in the collection, The Empty Chair. That was about me, wasn't it? About the hole you left in our lives," Rebecca corrected, remembering the story about a family who set a place at the table every night for an absent father. The empty chair, becoming both a memorial and an accusation. "It wasn't my most subtle work. It was powerful," James said quietly. "Made me understand, more than anything else, what I'd done to you both." The conversation might have turned even more uncomfortable had Emma not yawned widely at that moment, providing a natural break in the tension. "I think I need sleep," she announced, standing and stretching. "It's been a weird couple of days." Rebecca nodded, grateful for the shift. "We all should rest. Tomorrow we'll be busy with preparing the FBI tip." They established a similar sleeping arrangement to the previous night, Emma and Rebecca taking the bedrooms, while James insisted on the couch in the living area. As Rebecca settled into her room, she could hear the murmur of voices from the main cabin, James and Emma continuing their conversation in quieter tones. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Rebecca found herself staring at the ceiling, processing the surreal situation. Somewhere during these past 2 days, the narrative of her life had fundamentally shifted. The story she had told herself for 12 years of the husband who selfishly abandoned his family for another woman was being rewritten, forcing her to reconsider long-held resentments and certainties. If James was telling the truth, and increasingly she believed he was, then his actions, while still devastating, came from a place of misguided protection rather than callous abandonment. It didn't erase the pain he had caused, but it reframed it in ways she wasn't yet sure how to process. And now, here they were, reunited under the strangest of circumstances, facing danger together as though the intervening years had been merely a pause rather than a permanent break. Rebecca wasn't naive enough to imagine they could simply resume being a family. Too much had happened. Too many wounds still needed healing. But watching Emma with James today, she had glimpsed possibilities she had long since discarded. Whatever tomorrow brought, whether their plan succeeded or failed, whether they returned to their normal lives or continued this strange, fugitive existence, something had irreversibly changed. The past had caught up with them, yes, but perhaps it had also opened a door to a different kind of future. With that thought lingering in her mind, Rebecca finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the sound of the lake lapping gently at the shore just beyond her window. The next morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. James was already awake when Rebecca emerged from her room, seated at the small dining table with his phone and a notebook, working on retrieving his evidence files. "Any progress?" she asked, heading for the coffee maker that was already half full. "About 30% complete," James replied without looking up. "The retrieval process is slower than I'd hoped. Some of the server connections are unstable." Rebecca poured herself coffee and joined him at the table. In the morning light, she could see the strain on his face more clearly. The deep lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the perpetual tension in his shoulders. 12 years of running had taken a visible toll. "You never considered turning yourself in?" she asked, "making a deal with the authorities in exchange for protection?" James finally looked up from his work. "Many times, but the organization has connections within federal agencies. I couldn't be certain any deal would be honored once I was in custody." He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "Besides, as I said before, coming forward would have painted targets on you and Emma forever. I couldn't risk that." Before Rebecca could respond, Emma's bedroom door opened and their daughter appeared, already dressed and alert. "Morning," she said, heading straight for the coffee. "Where are we with the file retrieval?" "About a third of the way there," James informed her. "It should accelerate once the initial authentication sequences are complete." Emma nodded, pouring herself a cup and bringing her own phone to the table. "I've been thinking about our approach to the FBI. We need to give them enough to launch an investigation, but not so much that they immediately connect it to us. Focus on the money laundering aspects," James suggested. "The Financial Crimes Unit would be most interested in those patterns, and they're somewhat removed from the violent enforcement side of the organization." They spent the morning strategizing, with James explaining the structure of the criminal organization and Emma identifying the most effective data points to include in their anonymous tip. Rebecca, feeling somewhat out of her depth with the technical details, took charge of practical matters, preparing meals, organizing their limited supplies, keeping watch through the cabin windows for any sign of unwelcome visitors. Around midday, Emma announced she needed a break and headed outside to walk along the lakeshore. Rebecca watched from the porch as her daughter moved slowly along the water's edge, occasionally stopping to skip stones across the placid surface. "She has your thoughtfulness," James said, joining Rebecca on the porch. "That way, she gets quiet when she's processing something complex." Rebecca glanced at him, surprised by the observation. "I always thought she got that from you." "The analytical side. Maybe it's a bit of both," James suggested with a small smile, nature and nurture working together. They stood in companionable silence, watching their daughter in the distance. The moment felt strange in its normalcy, like countless parents observing their child with shared pride and concern. "I'm sorry," James said suddenly, his voice low, "for everything, for leaving the way I did, for not finding a better solution." Rebecca kept her eyes on Emma as she replied, "I spent years being angry at you, hating you even. It was easier that way, to believe you were simply selfish and cruel." "I deserved that hatred," James acknowledged. "Maybe," Rebecca conceded. "But Emma didn't deserve to grow up without her father. That's the part I've struggled to forgive." James nodded, accepting this truth. "If I could go back," he began. "But you can't," Rebecca finished for him. "None of us can. We can only move forward from here." "And what does forward look like?" James asked. "After this is over, assuming we succeed in ending the threat, what happens to us?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully explore. What place did James have in their lives now? Could 12 years of absence be bridged? Did they even want to try? "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "I think that depends on a lot of things. On Emma, mostly. And on you," James added softly. What you want matters too, Rebecca. She turned to face him then, really looking at him, not the ghost from her past or the harried fugitive of the present, but the man standing before her now. Different, certainly, older, wearier, humbled by his experiences, but she could still see traces of the James she had once loved, in the gentle crease of his smile, in the intensity of his gaze. What I want, she said carefully, is for us all to be safe. For Emma to have the life she deserves, without looking over her shoulder. Beyond that, I honestly don't know. James nodded, accepting this tentative, uncertain answer. That's fair. More than fair, given everything. They were interrupted by Emma, returning from her walk, her cheeks flushed from the cool spring air. I had an idea while I was out there, she announced, about how to structure the FBI tip. We should present it as coming from a competing criminal organization, someone with a vested interest in taking down these guys, but who can't go through official channels themselves. James looked impressed. That's actually brilliant. It gives them a plausible reason for the anonymous nature of the tip and makes the information more credible. Exactly, Emma said, warming to her idea. Law enforcement is used to getting information from rival criminal elements. It won't raise the same red flags as a tip that seems to come from nowhere. They spent the afternoon refining this approach, with James guiding them through the nuances of criminal organizational structures and Emma applying her technical expertise to craft a believable digital footprint for their fictional informant. By evening, James's evidence retrieval had reached 80% completion, and Emma had built a secure framework for transmitting their tip. The plan was coming together faster than they had anticipated, bringing with it both hope and anxiety about what would follow. After dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, the best they could manage with their limited supplies, they gathered around the fireplace again. The mood was more relaxed than the previous evening, the forced proximity of the past days having worn away some of the initial awkwardness. "Tell me something," Emma said to James as they sat watching the flames. "If we manage to end this threat, what will you do? Will you disappear again?" The directness of the question seemed to catch James off guard. He stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been running for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place, how to live a normal life." He glanced between Emma and Rebecca. "And I don't know what place, if any, I might have in your lives." "That's not really an answer," Emma pointed out. James sighed. "No, it's not. The honest truth is I've been surviving, not planning. The idea of having a future beyond the next few months, the next identity change, it hasn't seemed realistic." "But if it were possible," Emma pressed, "if you could choose, what would you want?" The question hung in the air, weighty with possibility. Rebecca found herself holding her breath, unexpectedly invested in James's answer. "I'd want," James began, then faltered. He tried again. "I'd want the chance to know you, Emma, to be part of your life in whatever way you'd allow. I'd want to find a way to make amends, though I know that might never be fully possible." His gaze shifted briefly to Rebecca. "I'd want to find a purpose beyond running and hiding, something meaningful." Emma nodded, absorbing his response. "I think I'd want that too," she said quietly. "The knowing you part, I mean. I've spent most of my life wondering who you really are, why you left. What I might have done—" "Emma, no," James interrupted, leaning forward intently. "Nothing you did caused me to leave. Nothing. You have to believe that." "Logically, I know that," Emma said. "But there's always been this part of me that wondered if I somehow wasn't enough to make you stay." She gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Kids tend to make everything about themselves." "You were perfect," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've regretted it every day since." Rebecca watched the exchange with a lump in her throat. For all her own pain and anger at James, seeing Emma finally receive this affirmation, this absolute assertion that her father's abandonment had nothing to do with her worth, felt profoundly necessary. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that emotional exchange, with Emma asking about James's travels over the years and James sharing carefully edited stories of the places he'd been and the odd jobs he'd worked. Rebecca contributed occasionally, but mostly observed, noting the gradual easing of tension between father and daughter as the evening progressed. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Rebecca found herself alone with James in the main room, Emma having already retired to her bedroom. "Thank you," James said softly. "For what?" "For raising her so well. For being strong enough to do it on your own." He shook his head in wonder. "She's remarkable, Rebecca. Smart, confident, resilient. That's because of you." Rebecca felt a complicated warmth at his words. "She is remarkable. And yes, I had a hand in that. But she also got a lot from you. Her analytical mind, her determination. Even when you weren't there, parts of you were present in her." James nodded, clearly moved by this acknowledgement. "Tomorrow's going to be decisive," he said, changing the subject. "Once we send that tip to the FBI, we're committed to this course of action." "Are you having doubts?" Rebecca asked. "Not about the plan itself, but about what comes after." James ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture from their life together that Rebecca hadn't realized she remembered. "For 12 years, my sole focus has been staying hidden, staying alive. The possibility of that ending, it's both liberating and terrifying." Rebecca understood more than she would have expected. "It's like when my divorce from you was finalized," she said. "I had been so focused on legal proceedings, on simply getting through each day, that when it was done, I felt oddly lost. The thing that had structured my life, even negatively, was gone." "Exactly," James said, looking grateful for her understanding. "What did you do after the divorce was final?" Rebecca smiled at the memory. "I planted a garden, something that required care and attention, but also patience. Something that would grow and change over time." She shrugged slightly. "It was symbolic, I suppose. A new beginning, a way of putting down roots again." James nodded thoughtfully. "A garden. I like that." They said goodnight soon after, James settling onto the couch and Rebecca retiring to her room. As she lay in the darkness, Rebecca found herself considering possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to contemplate before, of James remaining in their lives in some capacity, of Emma having her father back, of perhaps finding a way forward that acknowledged both the pain of the past and the potential of the future. It was too soon for definitive answers, she knew. Too much remained uncertain, both practically and emotionally. But for the first time in years, Rebecca fell asleep, thinking not just of what had been lost, but of what might yet be found. Morning arrived with a sense of anticipation. The file retrieval was complete, and Emma was putting the finishing touches on their anonymous tip package. James moved about the cabin with barely contained nervous energy, checking windows, reviewing their exit strategy, repeatedly confirming that their digital footprints were properly obscured. "Once we send this," he reminded them over breakfast, "we should be prepared to move quickly if necessary. The FBI won't act immediately, but our friends in the organization might if they get wind of increased federal interest." "Where would we go?" Rebecca asked. "Back to the city?" James shook his head. "Not yet. I have another safe location about 100 miles north of here, more isolated than this cabin. We should lie low there for at least a week, monitoring news and law enforcement channels for any sign of activity." "A week?" Emma looked concerned. "I have finals coming up. Mom has her job." "I know it's disruptive," James acknowledged, "but we need to be certain the threat is contained before you return to your normal lives." Emma nodded reluctantly, turning back to her laptop. "I'm ready to transmit when you are." James took a deep breath, looking to Rebecca for final confirmation. She nodded, and he turned back to Emma. "Do it. With a few keystrokes, Emma sent their carefully crafted package of evidence to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, routed through multiple servers and disguised as a tip from a rival criminal organization. The room fell silent as they all stared at the screen, though there was nothing to see, no confirmation, no immediate response. "Now we wait," James said quietly. The waiting proved more difficult than any of them had anticipated. With the immediate task completed, time seemed to slow to a crawl. They packed their few belongings in preparation for departure, but decided to remain at the cabin until evening, giving them a chance to monitor initial reactions to their tip. Emma set up alerts on her secure channels to notify them of any unusual law enforcement activity related to Meridian Capital or the names James had provided. James made arrangements by phone for access to the Northern Safe House, speaking in a coded language that Rebecca found herself surprisingly able to follow, a remnant, perhaps, of their years together. By mid-afternoon, a nervous restlessness had settled over them all. Rebecca suggested a walk along the lake to clear their heads, and to her surprise, both James and Emma agreed readily. The day was pleasant, with spring warmth beginning to assert itself over the lingering winter chill. As they walked the shoreline path, Rebecca found herself between James and Emma, the three of them falling into a natural rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. "I used to imagine moments like this," Emma admitted suddenly, "when I was younger. The three of us together doing normal family things." James looked pained at the confession. "Emma, I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty," she clarified. "Not anymore. It's strange how life works sometimes. How things you think will never happen suddenly do, but in ways you never could have anticipated. Life rarely follows the paths we expect," Rebecca agreed. "Sometimes for worse, sometimes for better." They continued walking, the conversation flowing more easily than it had since James's return. For a brief period, they were just three people enjoying a lakeside stroll, sharing observations about nature and memories of other waters they had known. The peaceful interlude was shattered when they returned to the cabin and checked Emma's alerts. There had been unusual activity at the FBI field office nearest to Meridian Capital, and a financial news site was reporting rumors of a federal investigation into several investment firms, including Meridian. "It's starting," James said, scanning the reports. "They're moving faster than I expected." "Is that good or bad?" Rebecca asked. "Good for the investigation, potentially complicated for us," James replied. "We should leave now before things escalate further." They gathered their belongings quickly, James performing a final sweep of the cabin to ensure they left no trace of their presence. As they prepared to depart, Emma's phone chimed with another alert. Her expression changed as she read the notification, a mixture of alarm and confusion crossing her face. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, immediately concerned. "Someone's trying to access my university accounts," Emma said, showing them her screen. "I have security measures that alert me to unauthorized attempts. Someone's trying to get into my research files, my email, everything." James moved to her side, studying the notification. "They're getting desperate. They know something's happening and they're trying to determine if you're involved." "But I wiped everything," Emma protested. "There's nothing for them to find." "They don't know that," James reminded her, "and desperate people take desperate actions." As if to emphasize his point, Rebecca's phone rang, her actual phone, not the prepaid one they had been using. The screen showed Melissa's name. "It's my sister," Rebecca said, showing James. "Put it on speaker," he instructed. "But be careful what you say," Rebecca answered, activating the speakerphone. "Melissa?" "Rebecca, thank God." Her sister's voice was tight with worry. "Where are you? Are you and Emma okay?" "We're fine," Rebecca assured her, exchanging concerned glances with James. "What's going on?" "Some men came to my house looking for you. Said they were colleagues of yours from school, but they didn't seem right, Becca. When I said I hadn't heard from you, they got aggressive, started searching my house without permission. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the men were gone." Rebecca felt a chill. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "No, I'm fine, just scared. The police took a report, but—" Melissa hesitated. "Becca, what's going on? Who are these people?" Rebecca looked to James, who shook his head subtly. "It's complicated, Mel. I can't explain right now, but I promise Emma and I are safe." "Where are you? Do you need help?" "We're okay. We're with—" Rebecca paused, unsure how much to reveal. "We're with someone who can help us. I'll call you when I can, but for now, it's better if you don't know where we are." "You're scaring me," Melissa said. "Should I call the FBI or something?" James nodded, surprising Rebecca. "Actually, that might not be a bad idea," she told her sister. "If these men come back or contact you again, you should definitely report it to the authorities." After a few more reassurances, Rebecca ended the call, turning to James with alarm. "They went to Melissa's. They're actively looking for us." "Which means we definitely need to move," James said grimly. "Now." They left the cabin by the back path, avoiding the main road where they might be spotted. James led them through wooded terrain to a small town several miles away, where he had arranged for a car to be waiting, an older model with no GPS or modern tracking capabilities. As they drove north, the sky darkened with approaching evening, matching the mood inside the vehicle. The brief normalcy of their lakeside walk seemed a distant memory now, replaced by the tense vigilance of flight. "We're going to be okay," James said, breaking the silence as he drove. "The FBI is already moving on the information we provided. It won't take long for them to start making arrests. Once the organization is dealing with that, we'll be less of a priority." Rebecca wanted to believe him, but the visit to Melissa's home had shaken her confidence. These people were clearly resourceful and determined. How long would they continue hunting for Emma, for all of them? As if reading her thoughts, James reached across the seat and briefly squeezed her hand. "I won't let anything happen to either of you," he promised. "Not this time." The gesture was small, the touch brief, but Rebecca found unexpected comfort in it, in this tangible connection to the man who had once been her partner in all things. Despite everything that had happened, despite the years of separation and pain, in this moment they were united in purpose, protecting their daughter. The road stretched ahead of them, leading toward an uncertain future. But for now, they were together, moving forward as a unit for the first time in 12 years. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, perhaps not ever, but it was something, a beginning of sorts. Or perhaps, more accurately, a chance to write a different ending to the story that had begun on that rainy night so long ago. The northern safe house proved to be more fortress than cabin, a sturdy structure built into the side of a hill, partially concealed by surrounding forest, with only a narrow dirt road for access. James explained that it belonged to an old ally, someone who had helped him during his early years on the run and who now used it primarily for hunting trips. "No one knows about this place except Marshall, and he's currently overseas," James assured them as he unlocked the heavy front door. "We should be secure here while we monitor the situation." The interior was rustic but well-equipped. A generator for power, satellite internet access, a wood stove for heat, and enough preserved food to last weeks if necessary. There were 2 bedrooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace and a small loft accessible by ladder. It felt remote, isolated from the world, in a way that was both comforting and slightly unnerving. They settled in quickly, establishing a routine of monitoring news reports and law enforcement channels through Emma's secure connections. James took charge of security, regularly patrolling the perimeter and maintaining the generator, while Rebecca managed their limited supplies and prepared meals from the stockpiled provisions. By the second day, reports began emerging of FBI raids on Meridian Capital and several associated businesses. Financial news sites were buzzing with speculation about money laundering and connections to organized crime. James followed these developments with intense focus, explaining to Rebecca and Emma how each new piece of information fit into the larger picture of the organization's structure. They're starting with the financial side, he noted as they reviewed the latest news over breakfast. Smart approach. Follow the money first, build cases against the upper management, then work down to the enforcement arm. How long before they reach the people who are after us? Emma asked. Hard to say. The organization is designed with built-in firewalls between different operational aspects. The financial people may not even know who handles enforcement, at least not officially. James studied a list of names mentioned in one report. But the pressure is building. They'll be scrambling to contain the damage, which should divert resources away from finding us. Rebecca noticed that despite these encouraging developments, James maintained his vigilance. He never relaxed his security protocols, never suggested they might return to their normal lives sooner than planned. His caution was both reassuring and concerning, a reminder that the danger, while perhaps diminished, had not passed. On their third evening at the safe house, as they sat before the fireplace after dinner, Emma broached a subject that had clearly been on her mind. "What happens when this is over?" she asked, echoing the question she had posed to James earlier. "When we can go back to our lives?" James looked uncomfortable. "I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that. Even with the organization dismantled, there could be individuals who hold grudges, who might still pose a threat. So we just keep looking over our shoulders forever," Emma pressed. "That's not a life, Dad, that's survival." The casual use of Dad, the first time Emma had addressed James this way since his return, didn't go unnoticed by any of them. James's expression softened visibly at the word. "No, you're right. That's not a life." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "There might be options we haven't considered yet. Witness protection, perhaps, though that would mean new identities for both of you, leaving behind everything familiar." Rebecca shook her head. "I don't want that for Emma. She has a future, plans, friends. I don't want her to lose all that because of mistakes made years before she was even born." "What about you?" Emma asked James directly. "Would you disappear again, go back to being David Wilson, or whatever your next identity would be?" James was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "For 12 years, anonymity has been my shield. The idea of living openly, under my real name, it's both appealing and terrifying." "You could start over somewhere new," Rebecca suggested. "A fresh start." "Maybe." James looked up, meeting Rebecca's gaze. "But I've had a lot of fresh starts. What I haven't had is closure, reconciliation." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Reconciliation with the past, certainly, but perhaps also with each other, with the family that had been fractured by his actions. "I think," Emma said carefully, "that whatever happens, we should face it together. Not necessarily as a traditional family or anything, but as people who are connected, who care about each other's well-being." Rebecca felt a surge of pride in her daughter's maturity, her capacity for forgiveness without naivety. "I agree," she said. "Whatever comes next, we'll approach it as a unit. No more secrets, no more unilateral decisions that affect us all." James nodded, clearly moved by their inclusion of him in this future planning. "Together, then, however that looks." The conversation shifted to practical considerations, how they might safely return to their lives, what precautions would be prudent, how to explain their absence to friends and colleagues. As they talked, Rebecca noticed a gradual easing in James's demeanor, as though having a path forward, even an uncertain one, had lifted some of the weight he carried. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Rebecca found James sitting on the small porch at the back of the house, gazing at the stars visible through breaks in the forest canopy. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling into the chair beside him. James smiled faintly. "You used to say that when we were first married, when I'd get lost in my head about work or finances." "Did I? I'd forgotten." Rebecca was surprised by how many small details of their life together had faded over the years, preserved now only in James's memory. I was thinking about possibilities, he said after a moment, about what a life without running might look like. And it's both exciting and overwhelming. He turned to face her. For so long, my existence has been defined by absence, staying away from you and Emma, avoiding connections, remaining invisible. The prospect of presence, of building rather than hiding, it's almost too much to imagine. Rebecca understood. After James had left, she too had struggled with rebuilding, with learning to define herself not as abandoned wife, but as a whole person with a future still to be written. It takes time, she said, and patience with yourself. The person you become might not be the same as the one you were before. Is that how it was for you? James asked. After I left? Rebecca nodded. The Rebecca who existed before that night. She died, in a way. I had to become someone new, stronger in some ways, more cautious in others. Someone who could be both mother and father to Emma, who could stand on her own. You did an amazing job, James said quietly. I've always known that, even from a distance. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the forest around them alive with night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the occasional call of an owl, the distant movement of some small creature through the underbrush. There's something I need to ask you, Rebecca finally said, something I've wondered for years. Anything, James replied. Were you ever going to come back? If Emma hadn't stumbled onto those financial records, if this crisis hadn't forced your hand, would you have stayed away forever? James considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I asked myself that same thing countless times over the years, he admitted. There were moments, Emma's birthdays especially, when I came close to risking contact. But each time fear won out, fear that I'd bring danger to your door, yes, but also, he hesitated. Also, Rebecca prompted, fear that you'd both be better off without me, James finished softly. That my return would reopen wounds that had finally healed, that Emma would hate me, that you'd never forgive me. So, fear of rejection, not just fear of danger, Rebecca clarified. James nodded. Not my finest quality, I know. But yes, Rebecca appreciated his honesty. For what it's worth, I think Emma needed this. Needed to see you, to hear your explanation, to understand why you left. Even with all the danger it's brought, there's been healing too. And you? James asked hesitantly. Has there been healing for you as well? Rebecca considered the question carefully. I think it's beginning. Understanding why you left doesn't erase the pain of those years, but it changes how I view them, changes how I view you. She looked at him directly. You're not the villain in my story anymore, James. I don't know exactly what you are, but you're not that. The acknowledgement seemed to affect him deeply. He looked away, blinking rapidly, before turning back to her with a vulnerable openness she remembered from their early years together. Thank you, he said simply. That means more than I can express. Another comfortable silence fell between them. This one filled not with awkwardness, but with the quiet recognition of a threshold crossed. Not reconciliation exactly, but perhaps the first step toward it. The peace of the moment was shattered by the sound of Emma's voice, urgent and alarmed, from inside the house. Mom! Dad! You need to see this! They rushed inside to find Emma at her laptop, a news website displayed on the screen. The headline was stark: Federal agent killed in raid, connected to financial crimes investigation. James leaned over Emma's shoulder, scanning the article quickly. This changes everything, he said grimly. An agent's death will escalate federal involvement exponentially. The organization will be desperate now. Is that good or bad for us? Rebecca asked. Both. Good because more resources will be directed at taking down the organization. Bad because cornered animals are the most dangerous. James straightened, his expression resolute. We need to move up our timeline. Tomorrow I'll make contact with a federal prosecutor I trust, someone outside the normal channels who might be able to arrange protection in exchange for my direct testimony. You're turning yourself in? Emma asked. surprise evident in her voice. Not exactly. More like offering a deal. My evidence and testimony in exchange for immunity and protection for all of us. James looked between Rebecca and Emma. It's time to end this properly, once and for all. The decision marked a turning point. For the first time since his return, James was choosing to step out of the shadows, to face the consequences of his past actions directly, rather than continuing to run. The risk was significant. There was no guarantee his offer would be accepted, or that protection could be assured, but the potential reward was the freedom they all craved. Morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. James made the call to his contact, speaking in carefully coded language before arranging a meeting for later that day in a small town about 50 miles from the safe house. The prosecutor had agreed to come alone to hear James out before deciding whether to involve official channels. I should go by myself, James insisted as they prepared to leave. You two will be safer here. No, Emma said firmly. We agreed to face this together. All of us. Rebecca nodded her agreement. We're past the point of separation, James. Whatever happens next, we do it as a family. The word family seemed to catch him off guard, a flicker of emotion crossing his face before he nodded. Together then. But we take precautions. Separate vehicles, different routes to the meeting point. I'll go first to make sure it's not a trap. The meeting was set for noon at a public library. Neutral territory with multiple exits and enough people to provide cover without being too crowded. James would arrive first, confirm the prosecutor was alone, then signal for Rebecca and Emma to join them. As they prepared to depart, Emma impulsively hugged her father, a brief, fierce embrace that seemed to startle James before he returned it with equal intensity. Rebecca watched the interaction with a lump in her throat, seeing in it both the years lost and the possibility of a future reconnection. Be careful, Emma told him as she pulled away. We just found you again. Don't disappear on us. I won't, James promised. Not ever again. The drive to the meeting point was tense, Rebecca and Emma following James's car at a careful distance, watching for any sign of surveillance or danger. The small town appeared peaceful enough as they approached, a typical rural community with a main street of modest businesses and the library situated on a corner near the town square. They parked as planned in different areas and waited for James's signal, a text message containing only the word "clear" when it was safe to enter. Rebecca watched the library entrance from their parking spot, her heart racing with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The text came 12 minutes later. Rebecca and Emma walked casually to the library, entering through the main doors and following James's instructions to the reference section at the back. There they found him seated at a table with a middle-aged woman in a conservative suit. The prosecutor, Rebecca assumed. James stood as they approached, performing introductions. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Dawson. Caroline, this is my ex-wife Rebecca and our daughter Emma. The prosecutor nodded to them both, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp and assessing. James has been explaining your situation. Please, sit down. They joined them at the table, Emma positioning herself protectively close to her father. Rebecca noted the gesture with a mixture of surprise and warmth. Despite everything, Emma had developed a fierce loyalty to James in the short time since his return. I've reviewed some of the evidence James has provided, Dawson said, keeping her voice low. It's compelling, enough to potentially support an immunity deal in exchange for comprehensive testimony. Potentially, Rebecca questioned. There are complications, the prosecutor acknowledged. The death of the federal agent has raised the stakes considerably. There's significant pressure to prosecute everyone connected to this organization, regardless of their level of cooperation. I was never involved in any violent aspects of their operations, James emphasized. My role was strictly financial. I understand that, and it works in your favor, Dawson assured him. But there will be conditions, significant ones. Such as, Emma asked, full disclosure of all activities during your father's time with the organization, comprehensive testimony against all known members, and potentially, she hesitated, looking between them, potentially relocation and new identities for all of you. The words fell heavily in the quiet library space. Witness protection, a complete break from their current lives. New names, new histories, new beginnings far from everything and everyone they knew. For all of us, Rebecca clarified. Even Emma and me, Dawson nodded. Given the nature of this organization and their demonstrated willingness to target family members, yes, it would be the safest option. Emma looked stricken. My studies, my friends, everything, just gone. You could continue your education, Dawson said gently. Just at a different institution, under a new identity. It's not ideal, I know, but it's the most secure approach. Rebecca reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it supportively. We need to think about this, she told the prosecutor. It's a massive decision. Of course, Dawson agreed, but I should warn you that time is limited. The investigation is moving quickly, and my ability to negotiate favorable terms will diminish as more arrests are made. James looked torn, clearly struggling with the implications of his choices for Rebecca and Emma. Is there any alternative? Any way they could maintain their current lives? It would be riskier, Dawson admitted. We could attempt to keep your cooperation confidential, limit your court appearances, minimize public exposure, but I can't guarantee their safety under those circumstances, especially long-term. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, exploring options and implications, risks and possibilities. Throughout, Rebecca observed the dynamics at play. James's protective focus on Emma's future, Emma's growing realization of the consequences of her father's past, and her own evolving feelings about the path forward. When they finally left the library, no decision had been made. Dawson had given them 24 hours to consider their options before she would need a definitive answer. They drove back to the safe house in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Once there, they gathered in the main room, the weight of the choice before them hanging in the air. I'm so sorry, James said, breaking the silence. I never wanted this for either of you. If I could take it all back, the money laundering, the criminal connections, all of it, I would in a heartbeat. But you can't, Emma said, not unkindly. None of us can change the past. We can only decide what to do with the present. Rebecca nodded in agreement. The question isn't about blame anymore. It's about what future we want to build from here. They discussed their options long into the evening, the relative safety of witness protection against the profound disruption it would cause, the risks of maintaining their current identities against the preservation of Emma's educational path and Rebecca's career, the implications of either choice for their relationships with extended family and friends. As night fell, they reached no definitive conclusion, agreeing to sleep on the decision and reconvene in the morning. Emma retired to her room first, clearly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Rebecca found herself alone with James again, the two of them sitting before the fireplace as they had on previous evenings. The flickering light cast shifting shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of worry and fatigue. "What are you thinking?" she asked after a period of companionable silence. James sighed deeply. "That I've failed you both again, brought you to an impossible choice because of my past actions." "I don't see it that way," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. "Yes, your choices set these events in motion, but Emma's research, my decision to meet with you, our choice to face this together, those were our decisions, not yours alone." Still, witness protection." James shook his head. "It's asking so much of you both. New names, new histories, leaving behind everything familiar." Rebecca considered this. "It would be difficult," she acknowledged, "but maybe there's another way to look at it." "How so?" "As an opportunity, not just a loss. A chance to start fresh without the weight of the past." She looked at him directly. "For all of us." James seemed surprised by her perspective. You'd consider that? Walking away from your life, your career, everything you've built? I've reinvented myself once before when you left, Rebecca reminded him. It was painful, yes, but I survived. Grew stronger even. She smiled faintly. Besides, the most important part of my life would be coming with me. Emma, James said, nodding. Yes, and Rebecca hesitated, then decided to voice the thought that had been gradually forming over these days together. And perhaps you too, if that's something you'd want. The statement hung between them, an unexpected door opening onto possibilities neither had allowed themselves to consider. Rebecca, James said softly, her name almost a question. I'm not saying we pick up where we left off, she clarified quickly. Too much has happened for that. But maybe, in this new life, we could, I don't know, get to know each other again, see who we've become. James was quiet for a long moment, his expression a mixture of hope and caution. I'd like that, he finally said, more than I can express, but only if you're sure it's what you want, not what you think is necessary for Emma or for safety. I'm not sure of anything right now, Rebecca admitted, except that these past days, despite all the danger and uncertainty, have reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? That there were reasons I fell in love with you all those years ago. Reasons beyond the man who left that rainy night. She gazed into the fire, finding it easier to speak these truths without meeting his eyes. I've seen glimpses of that man again. In your protection of Emma, your willingness to sacrifice yourself for us, your regret for the pain you caused. James reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. The touch was gentle, tentative, not presuming, merely connecting. Whatever you decide, he said, whatever future you choose for yourself and for Emma, I'll respect it, support it, even if it doesn't include me. Rebecca turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. Let's take it one step at a time, she suggested. First, we make this decision about witness protection. Then we see where the path leads. They remained that way for some time, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled not with the awkwardness of strangers or the tension of adversaries, but with the quiet understanding of people who had once known each other deeply and might perhaps find their way back to some version of that connection. Morning brought clarity. Over breakfast, they discussed their options one final time, weighing risks against benefits, fears against hopes. In the end, the decision was unanimous. They would accept Dawson's offer of witness protection. It's the only way to ensure complete safety, James explained as they prepared to call the prosecutor. And it gives us all a chance to start fresh, without looking over our shoulders. Emma, who had been the most reluctant initially, now seemed reconciled to the choice. I can finish my degree somewhere else, she said. Maybe even explore new fields. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I could go back to my old life anyway. I'd always be wondering, watching for danger. Rebecca felt a mixture of grief and anticipation at the prospect of leaving behind the life she had built. Her home, her career, her friends, all would be left behind. Yet there was also a sense of liberation in the idea of starting anew, of building a life not defined by James's abandonment or by her identity as the woman he had left behind. They called Dawson together, confirming their decision. She arranged to meet them the following day to begin the process. Paperwork, preliminary interviews, the first steps toward their new identities. As they prepared for this final meeting, packing the few belongings they had brought to the safe house, there was a sense of purpose among them, a shared commitment to this new path, whatever challenges it might bring. The drive to meet Dawson felt different from their previous journey. There was tension still, certainly, but also a strange peace that came with having made their choice, with knowing that after 12 years of separation and secrets, they were moving forward together. The meeting place this time was a federal building in a small city, more official than the library had been. Dawson met them in a conference room, accompanied by two colleagues she introduced as witness protection specialists. The process was both more complex and more efficient than Rebecca had expected. There were forms to complete, questions to answer, details of their lives to document so that appropriate new identities could be constructed. James underwent the most extensive questioning, providing comprehensive information about his knowledge of the criminal organization and the evidence he could offer against its members. Throughout, Rebecca observed the interactions among the three of them, the way Emma remained protectively close to James, the gentle support James offered her in return, the occasional glances he sent Rebecca's way, seeking confirmation or reassurance. They were forming new patterns, establishing a family dynamic that was neither what had been before nor what might have been without the separation, but something uniquely their own. As the day progressed, the reality of their decision began to sink in. They would be given new names, new backgrounds, new locations, a complete reinvention of their identities. The process would take several weeks, during which they would remain under federal protection in a secure location. "What happens after that?" Emma asked, as they reviewed the timeline. "You'll be relocated to a new community," one of the specialists explained. "We'll provide housing initially, assistance with employment or education, regular check-ins to ensure your security. Over time, as the threat diminishes, the oversight will decrease." "And we'll stay together?" Rebecca confirmed. "All three of us?" The specialist glanced between them, clearly noting the complexities of their family situation. "That's entirely up to you. We can establish you as a family unit if that's your preference, or as individuals with connections if you'd prefer more separation. The program is designed to be flexible to your needs." Rebecca looked at James, a question in her eyes. He returned her gaze steadily, leaving the choice to her. "A family unit," she decided, "with the understanding that we'll determine the exact nature of that arrangement ourselves, over time." Emma smiled at this, the first genuine smile Rebecca had seen from her in days. "A second chance," she said quietly, "for all of us." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of details and preparations. By evening, they were being transported to a secure federal facility, a comfortable but closely monitored environment where they would remain during the transition process. As they settled into their temporary quarters, Rebecca found herself drawn to the window, looking out at the night sky. Behind her, she could hear James and Emma talking quietly, their voices forming a gentle backdrop to her thoughts. 12 years ago, on a rainy night, she had lost everything she thought defined her life, her husband, her financial security, her sense of the future. She had rebuilt from those ruins, creating a life of quiet strength and independence. Now standing at the threshold of yet another reinvention, she felt not fear, but a strange sense of completion, as though the circle that had broken that night was finally, imperfectly, being mended. James joined her at the window, respecting her space, but offering his presence. "Regrets?" he asked softly. Rebecca considered the question, looking not at him, but at their reflections in the glass. Older now, marked by experience, yet somehow more authentic than the younger versions of themselves had been. "No," she said finally, "not regrets. Just awareness of how strange life's paths can be, how endings can become beginnings, if you let them." James nodded, understanding. "I never imagined, when I called you that day, that we'd end up here, together, facing a new start." "Neither did I," Rebecca admitted. "I thought I'd heard the last of you years ago." "And if you had," James asked, "if I'd never called, if Emma hadn't done her research, if none of this had happened, would that have been better?" Rebecca turned from the window to face him directly. "Better? I don't know. Easier, certainly. Safer, but better." She shook her head. "I think there were truths we all needed to face, questions that needed answers. For Emma, especially." From across the room, Emma watched them, her expression thoughtful. She had her father's analytical mind and her mother's emotional intelligence, a combination that Rebecca suspected would serve her well in whatever life they built from here. "What happens now?" James asked. "Between us, I mean." Rebecca smiled slightly. "Now we do exactly what we told the witness protection people. We take it day by day. We get to know each other again, as the people we've become. We build something new without expectations or assumptions." "I'd like that," James said simply. "So would I," Rebecca replied, surprising herself with how true it felt. They rejoined Emma, the three of them sitting together as they discussed the practical aspects of their new situation, what they would need in their new lives, what they hoped for in a location, how they would adapt to new identities. The conversation was tentative at times, uncertain, but underpinned by a growing sense of connection, of shared purpose. That night, as Rebecca prepared for sleep in her separate room within the secure facility, she found herself thinking not of what was being left behind, but of what might lie ahead. New names, new home, new relationships, both with the world and with each other. It wasn't the future she had planned, but then life rarely followed the expected path. 12 years ago, the sound of a door slamming had marked the end of one chapter in her life. Tonight, the gentle closing of her bedroom door marked the beginning of another. What story would be written in those pages remained to be seen, but for the first time in a very long time, Rebecca found herself looking forward to turning the page. 3 months later, the house was small but comfortable, situated on a quiet street in a town whose name still sometimes felt foreign on Rebecca's tongue. Their new identities had been established with meticulous care. New histories, new documentation, new backgrounds that explained their arrival in this community far from their original homes. Rebecca, now Catherine Parker, had found a position teaching literature at a local community college. Emma, now Olivia Parker, had enrolled in the computer science program at a university 30 miles away, commuting several days a week. And James, now Daniel Parker, was working as a financial consultant for small businesses, using his expertise in a legitimate capacity for the first time in years. They had been established as a family, a divorced couple reconciling after years apart, with their adult daughter living with them temporarily. The arrangement provided both connection and space, allowing each of them to determine their own boundaries while maintaining the protective cover of family unity. In the late afternoon light, Rebecca sat on the back porch of their new home, a book open but unread in her lap. From inside, she could hear Emma and James talking, something about encryption protocols, their shared interest in technical subjects, providing common ground for rebuilding their relationship. The past 3 months had not been without challenges. There had been moments of tension, of uncertainty, of grief for what had been left behind, but there had also been moments of unexpected joy, of rediscovery, of connection that transcended the pain of the past. Emma had adapted with the resilience of youth, embracing her new identity and educational opportunities with determination. James had approached their new life with a combination of gratitude and caution, never presuming on Rebecca's feelings, but remaining steadfastly present, supportive. And Rebecca, she had found herself navigating a complex emotional landscape, mourning the life she had built while appreciating the opportunity to construct something new, something that incorporated lessons from both her time with James and her years without him. Their relationship was evolving slowly, carefully. They shared meals, conversations, occasional outings as a family unit. They were learning each other again, not as the young couple they had been, nor as the estranged ex-spouses of recent years, but as the people they had become through all their experiences. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no moment of passionate reunion. Instead, there had been small steps, a touch of hands while washing dishes, a shared laugh over a movie, conversations that extended late into the evening after Emma had gone to bed. A gradual building of trust, of understanding, of connection. The door opened behind her, and James, Daniel now, she reminded herself, stepped out onto the porch. "Mind some company?" he asked. Rebecca smiled, gesturing to the chair beside her. "Not at all." He sat, offering her a cup of tea he had brought out. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Emma's applying for a research internship," James said eventually. "Something in data security. She's excited about it." Rebecca nodded. "She told me. It's good to see her engaging with her studies again, making plans. She's resilient, like her mother." The compliment brought a smile to Rebecca's lips. "And determined, like her father." Another comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, a dog barking, the occasional passing car. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked suddenly. "Accepting witness protection, leaving everything behind?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss specific things. My garden, my book club, the familiarity of places I knew well. But regret the decision?" She shook her head. "No, this was the right path for us. For all of us." James agreed softly. He reached across the space between their chairs, his hand extended in invitation. Rebecca looked at it for a moment, this hand that had once been as familiar as her own, that had then been absent for so long, that was now becoming known to her again in new ways. She placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwining with a rightness that transcended time and circumstance. They weren't the same people who had stood before each other on their wedding day, full of youth and certainty, nor were they the strangers they had become during the years of separation. They were something else entirely, older, wiser, scarred by experience, but perhaps better equipped to build something lasting because of those very scars. The future remained unwritten, their story still unfolding. But as they sat together in the gathering dusk, hands joined in that simple, profound connection, Rebecca felt a sense of peace she had not known in 12 years. That rainy night when the door had slammed behind James had marked an ending, yes. But here, in this moment, she recognized it had also been the first step on a long, circuitous path that had led them, ultimately, back to each other. Different, changed, but perhaps finally ready to build something true. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of our story of betrayal, redemption, and second chances. If you've enjoyed this journey through the complex landscape of human relationships, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales that explore the depths of the human experience. Hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Rebecca and James's story. Until next time, remember that even the most painful endings can sometimes lead to unexpected new beginnings.